less than the trees and stars. You have arrived.
Go placidly amid the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and listen to others, even the dull and ignorant. They too have their story. Avoid loud and aggressive persons. They are vexations to the spirit. If you compare yourself with others, you may become vain and bitter, for always there will be greater and lesser persons. Enjoy your achievements as well as your plans. Keep interested in your own career. However humble, it is a real possession in the changing fortunes of time. Exercise caution in your business affairs, for the world is full of trickery. But let this not blind you to what virtue there is. Many persons strive for high ideals, and everywhere life is full of heroism. Be yourself.
There you are. So, just when you thought you knew everything about sex, John Ward is going to attempt to set you straight. He'll explain the evolution of sexual mores in the Western world and why sex is both naughty and nice. We probably know why it's nice. Why sex has been used, abused, misunderstood, misrepresented, and misread for too long. John Ward was born and raised in Africa, studied at the John Cabot International College in Rome, Italy, Cambridge University, Duke University, and the University of Georgia in Athens, as in Georgia. Let us welcome John Ward.
Okay, am I on? Good. Thank you very much, everyone, for having me again. Yes, I've studied all those places. I wasn't just the janitor in all those places. One thing I did study in Duke University quite intensely was the Victorian era. So sociology, literature, that sort of thing, history. And a lot of our sexual mores come from that time, the Victorian time, which, as you know, is kind of repressive. But let's start with a little story. I was at Duke University and I was at a swimming pool. And in those days, as a student, I couldn't afford much, and I had a black pair of jockey underpants that looked like a bathing suit. So I went to the pool in those. I was very, very skinny in those days. In fact, when I look at my 2 passports from 10 years ago, I guess, this guy ate this guy. That's the only relationship I can see. But anyway. So back there, I'm lying there, and I've got my bathing suit on, and this girl, and I used to be quite handsome. I know that's almost impossible to believe, but I was quite a looker. And she came over, and she was talking, and she said, oh, those are nice Speedos. I said, well, they're not Speedos, they're underpants. Oh my God, her reaction was to turn away and not look. I said, I'm just joking, they're Speedos. Oh, no, I'm kidding, they really are underpants. What? Oh no! They were the same thing, they covered the same amount, but her reaction just went with what I was saying. It was unbelievable, and I just had so much fun saying, no, they're really underwear. Oh my God, no, they're Speedos. I'm kidding you. Could I come out in public? Oh, thank God, no, they're underwear. Ah! I mean, it was incredible. It was like playing with a yo-yo. Why do we have these crazy mores? I mean, we really have some strange ideas about sex. And where did it all start? Well, I'd like to go back to the Romans and the Greeks, who seemed to be very open-minded and naturalistic about sex. I mean, there were no problems with being gay in Greece, we all know that. And the Romans didn't have a problem with being gay. I mean, there were actual legions, a Roman legion of fighters. The whole legion would be gay men. And they used to say these guys were brutal because they were protecting their lovers in battle. And they were very effective legions. But they recognized certain facts of life. And there were gay people, probably a similar percentage back in those days, as there is today. And none of the prejudices that people have developed. But why have we developed those prejudices? Why have we developed the overall mores that we have and the attitudes we have towards sex? There was a phenomenon in Rome that began called Christianity. And it was a very new thing. It was monotheistic. Up until then, it was polytheistic, the beliefs. They had a lot of gods in Greece and a lot of gods in Rome. There were the Greek gods just renamed. Zeus became, Spashin. And Hera became, Barbarella or whatever. The Romans just put their own Italian names on the Greek gods. So Vulcan became Mars and so on. Poseidon became Neptune and so on. Anyway, there's a registry, you can go look it up. But the attitudes continued with polytheism, but when we went to monotheism, all of a sudden everything changed. In Rome you had public baths, because nudity was not necessarily associated with sex. It helps, but it's not necessarily sex. So men and women would go to these beautiful public baths. I studied near the Terme di Caracalla in Rome. Those are the baths, they were called terme because they were hot. How were they heated? Well, they had another very convenient aspect to Roman life, and that was slaves. You got slaves, and they stoked fires under these beautiful baths, and the baths were always warm. So you went to the bath, and you cleaned yourself, and this seemed natural. But then when they were dealing in the Middle East with the Semitic people, the Semitic people, by the way, are the Jews and the Arabs, not just one set. They're both Semitic peoples, and they were desert peoples at the time. And when you live in the desert and you find water, you drink it. You don't wash your body in it. So that wasn't a big requirement in the Middle East. So the Romans are there, and they're trying to bring their culture and stuff. I don't know if you've ever seen The Life of Brian, when they say, well, what did the Romans do for us? Well, they brought us wine, and they brought us the roads, and so on and so forth. But they weren't able to bring everything. They were an oppressive imperialist country, and these people were oppressed. So they were looking for someone to help them and lead them out of this. Their own Gandhi, their own Messiah of some kind. And Jesus came forward. There were a lot, by the way, a lot of people who claimed to be the Messiah and didn't quite make the grade. But he came forward, and Jesus was a Jew. But he didn't like some of the practices, like the practice of mercenary religion. We have this now in Europe. I just came back from Europe, and I went to a church in Siena, in Tuscany. And I wanted to walk in. They said, where's your ticket? I said, I don't have a ticket. I'm a Catholic. Of course, I didn't tell them I'm the worst Catholic since Genghis Khan. And I would probably burst into flame when I walked in. But I said, I'd like to go in and pray. Oh, no, you need a ticket. I said, no, I don't need a ticket. I'm a Catholic. Let me in my bloody church. No, you need a ticket. Go and get a ticket or I'll call the Carabinieri. So I said, well, I'm not going in your church. And I got my camera. They had posters of the inside of the church. I took pictures of that. And I said, that'll suffice for my wife. Anyway, in Spain now, I was in Barcelona with my wife and her mother, and we went to this big cathedral in the Gothic Quarter. Beautiful, beautiful cathedral. I'd been in it before, because back in the 70s when I was studying in Italy, and I'd go over to Spain every now and then, you could go in and pray, or just look around and be amazed. And it's absolutely gorgeous. It's a Gothic cathedral. Now, you go up there and it's €10 to enter. But it's not just €10 to enter. If you are a woman, you need to cover your head. And we sell scarves here, they're €10. And let's see if I see anybody here. Oh, you got your arms exposed. Sorry, you need to put a scarf around, because even though God made those things, he doesn't like to see them around. And any girl with shorts or with a short dress would have to buy a scarf. €50 you could get in. To me, this is so mercenary. And, you know, I was a very good Catholic until about 14 years old. And then I became very bad. But it really offended me, you know, because you can't now go up to a church and say, you know, I'd like to pray. And this is what was happening back then, pretty much the same thing in Galilee and in Nazareth and these places. And Jesus said, no, we don't want merchants in here. This is not a place for making money. This is a place for addressing God and your concerns and listening to what your heart tells you about him. So he broke off and he formed his own little band of people. Now, Jesus, how did he feel about sex? Well, one of his best friends was an ex-prostitute. He didn't care about that. That was so unimportant. He loved this woman, Mary Magdalene, and it is suggested that John, the beloved, not Baptist, the beloved, may have been gay. He was a beautiful young man, and Jesus loved him. I don't believe, or I don't know, but I don't believe it's suggested that it's a sexual love. But he loved John. John was called John the Beloved. And so I don't think any of those prejudices existed then. But people started to, first of all, when we became monotheistic and Christian, everything becomes an amalgamation of everybody's opinions and desires and fears and inability to accept. So you had a lot of people saying, well, you know, that means that people have to be women have to be virgins until they're married. I mean, the virgin who gave birth to Christ, she was the virgin, right? Why? Well, she was pure. Wait a minute. Does losing your virginity or rupturing the hymen mean you're not pure? You know, this just is weird to me, because if God created everything, he created that way of propagation. Now, why should his son, who was his son and man, he was both man and God, why is it that he had to be born of a virgin? Well, she's pure. I don't think non-virgins are impure. I mean, why is it a lack of purity not to have a hymen? Now, in those days, of course, we didn't think men had to be virgins. Why? Well, a man can shove anybody he likes, but he's not going to get pregnant, right? A woman, no matter how many precautions she takes, there's always the possibility of pregnancy. Okay, nowadays, there's always the possibility, of course, of disease as well, and some really bad ones today. So, but back then, let's stay back then for a minute. You had Christ going around preaching tolerance and love and all that, and you had people trying to turn that into their own agenda. Now, he formed the church. He said to Peter, to Simon actually, he says, I'm going to call you Peter because you are Petrus, the rock upon which I will build my church. What church did he build on Peter? Which church is Peter the bishop of? Don't all shout at once. The Catholic Church. You know, so if you want to be a true Christian, you must go to Christ's church that he built on top of Peter, which is the Catholic Church. Now, I'm not saying you have to do that, because I've obviously withdrawn a bit. But this is, if you're going to follow it word for word, that's what you got to do. Okay. Unless you're Jewish, and then you say, that's Christian stuff, forget it. I like my way of doing things. It's a lot more intelligent. But, so all of a sudden, you had church people saying, now, we need stuff to do. So here's what we're going to do. In the Roman time, you had the Lupercal, or the Lupercalis, and that was a celebration and it was done on the Palatine Hill, which is still in Rome, you can go visit it, And they believed that Romulus and Remus were suckled by a she-wolf who lived in a cage. The she-wolf lived in a cage under the Palatine Hill. They still have a t-shirt that they sell with a lovely logo of the wolf. It's a little bit of a cartoon wolf, and there are two babies, and one baby's sucking and the other one's going, and the wolf is looking very disconcerted. He is like wolf milk. I love that t-shirt. That just epitomizes Rome to me. Anyway, so they celebrated this once a year. Now, here's what they did. They recognized that kids from about 12 on have sexual feelings. This is what God, or if you believe nature implanted that in us, this is what God or nature did to us. God is saying, oh, you're 12, okay, here's some hormones. Oh my God, what do I do with this? The Romans had this lupercal, and every year the teens could get together and decide, I want to be with her for the next year, you see? And you would date for that year, and until the next lupercal you could change partners, or you could elect to stay with that person. Now, and they had sex. And there were ways, with sea sponges and stuff of avoiding pregnancy. Well, what was the benefit of this? Well, they learned, one, commitment. They learned relationships with the opposite sex, and so on and so forth. So this is how they dealt with that in Rome. Now, when the Christians came, first of all, we stopped bathing because it was naughty to see people naked. Number two, we got a bishop called Valentine, Bishop Valentine, and one of the Roman emperors, and I'm not even referring to my notes, I should tell you this, these are real names. Emperor Gelasius, maybe I should have left that out. He made a proclamation, nobody's getting married, you're not marrying people here, we'll do it the Roman way when you reach a certain age, because you don't have to marry as a child, as a teenager. You marry later on, and you marry because for position, or for money, or for something pragmatic, not for that stupid thing called love. Anyway, and of course kids were getting together and wanting to get together as Christians, but the Christians saying, no, you can't get together unless it's sanctified by the church, me, and there'll be a donation for that too. And so he forbade that. And so what Valentine did was he said, I don't care what the emperor says. If you want to be married, I'll marry you. So the emperor said, okay, you broke the law, I'm taking your head off. So that's why he is Saint Valentine, and that's why we celebrate Valentine's Day, because he's the romantic guy that forced little ones to marry before they had sex. Now we have that attitude today. We say to our kids, don't have sex until you're married. And our thinking is pragmatic, because you want to have a husband and a wife both there to support the child, raise the child, because I don't want to be a grandparent raising my grandkids. I've done my job. I just want to retire, leave me alone. Okay. But the problem is this. That makes sex the reason to get married, because you've got this tremendous desire and you have no outlet for it. So, and especially you, that sex blinds you, right? It's like you marry the first stud that comes along, or the first woman who'll go, oh, okay, So, and that's why you have such a high rate of divorce, because you're marrying for the wrong reasons. We had Mormon friends who, she insisted, oh no, virgin until you're married and all that. And in America, they actually have male virgins, which is just amazing to me. Maybe in Canada too, I don't know, but I've never heard of virginity with... You don't? Okay. Good. This is a Polish man from Canada, so he knows it. But boys will say, I'm still a virgin. Well, what do you do? What are you trying to achieve? But he wants to stay pure, and if you have two people who are virgins, okay, let's what? I don't know, but just let's, well, what do we do? Well, I know part A goes into part B, Anyway, so we have all these repressions that cause all kinds of problems. So after the Romans, now we have this Christian thing going on, and you had people like Paul, who was a misogynist, St. Paul, couldn't stand women, and couldn't stand sex. He didn't want anything to do with sex. And he wrote about it, and he wrote things like, a man who is married cannot serve God. He's got too many mundane concerns like looking after his wife, looking after his children. And a woman who is married cannot serve God. This is written in Paul. This is why the Catholic Church says priests and nuns cannot marry. Now, if you hear about all these priests molesting little altar boys and stuff, you wonder, why? Why do they do that? Well, because God didn't say, oh, you're going to be a priest? Okay, let me just take the hormones out of you. There you go, now you can be a priest. No, they're just normal too, and they have desires. And the little choir boys sound like girls, they don't have beards, and they have high little voices. And the priests are drawn to them. And to blame them solely is short-sighted, because you have to look back at the genesis of this. In the Bible, Paul says you cannot be married if you want to serve God. This is denying a natural thing. It's like saying you cannot drink water if you want to serve God. What the hell am I going to drink? Just wine. Okay. That appeals to this guy over here. But after about, a month or two of drinking just wine, you're going to say, oh, give me a glass of water, please. Okay? So, anyway, and then you had this guy called St. Augustine. Augustine lived in Hippo, which is in the north of Africa. It's where Algeria is now. And, the Council of Hippo, the Council of Nicaea and the Council of Constantine and the Council of Hippo, they all edited the Bible brutally. I mean, the Bible was like 3 times what it is today. There was a lot in there, stuff about God's mother and father. Did you know God had a mother and father? No? Yes. Guess what his mother's name was? Clarissa? No. Close? Rosemary. Rosemary, yes. No. Yes. God's mother sitting right here, ladies and gentlemen. Now, her name was Sophia. Yes, that's in the Gnostic Gospels, which is the part that's been edited out. And somebody smartly just put it all together and said, read this. This is interesting too, because the book says, do not edit this book. And they edited it. She, at one point, says to God, who's misbehaving. This is very Greek, But our God, she says, if you don't behave, I will tell your father, the master of all things. They never say his name, but, oh, so God had a father? Come on. So did the master of all things have a father too? You start wondering, where this all comes from. We believe, because of the little bit of Bible that we've been given to read, that God is the beginning, the origin, the Word, began with God and the da-da-da-da-da. But according to the original Bible, no. Even the Vulgate Bible has been edited. All the different Bibles, down to the King James, and now we've got New Bible and this, that, and the other thing. So, anyway, here's this guy called St. Augustine. Augustine lived in Hippo. Augustine wrote the definitive tome on sexual morality for the Catholic Church. And they made him a saint. But what they don't tell you was that Augustine, before he was 45, 50, when he was starting to slow down, was stooping anything that moved. Augustine was a rake. He had women, he had boys, he had everything he could get his hands on. And then at about 45, 50, when we all start to say, boy, I'm not that interested. I can read a book now and not think about sex. It's amazing, He goes, okay, I've done really bad and I'll probably go to hell, but I'm going to write this tome. So he writes this tome, and it is the definitive description of how we should behave. The church was thrilled because it involved them in your lives. So when you want to be with a woman or a man, you go to the church and you say, please, we'd like to be married. Okay, you can be married, and then I'll advise you on this and that and the other thing, and they're now involved in your lives, and there's some control. Okay, let's move on from St. Augustine, and we started, let's go to the Dark Ages. In the Dark Ages, nobody knows anything, so we'll move on. No, the Dark Ages, we burned everything that wasn't Christian. Well, of course, there was very little to burn, because most of the printing, there was no printing, most of the writing was done by monks, who had all the time in the world to sit there and copy out the Bible and other things that people thought, like St. Augustine's book, and they copied it out by hand in beautiful calligraphy. It took years to get just one book done. So most of what was out there was religious. And then you had people traveling to other countries, seeing amazing things that they didn't understand because it was written in hieroglyphics. Or, for example, when they came here, when Columbus came, and they brought, of course, a bunch of priests to make sure that everybody was conforming all around the world to their particular beliefs. The Catholic priest came in, saw these amazing documents that the Mayans had come up with, couldn't understand it, said it must be of the devil, burned all that. So if you go down to Chichen Itza now, there's a fly bugging me here. Get away. Anyway, you go down to Chichen Itza, they had the most amazing science with of astronomy. They were so familiar with it. They have 3 years that rotate and interlock every so many hundred years. In fact, the world is about to end on 2012 because the Mayans told us about that. We're just a figment of our imagination right now. It's gone. It's done. And that was when the three years came together and coincidentally met. They said that would be the end of the world. But they were brilliant. I mean, they had observatories, they had little things where they checked the stars, checked the movement. There was so much we could have learned. But because it was in a language we didn't understand, we were intolerant, we burned it. But talk about the Middle Ages. Okay, in the Middle Ages, you had peasants, your serfs, and the nobility, and royalty. The nobility and royalty didn't conform to anybody's sexual mores. They stooped around the place, they had mistresses, and anybody here called Fitzroy? I know there's a Roy, but is there a Fitzroy? Somebody Fitzroy? No? Okay. If there was a Fitzroy, it means you have royal blood, but you are the bastard son of the king. Roy is king. So in French, like in 1066, when the French came over and conquered Britain, and it was William the Bastard of Orange came over, and one of his men put an arrow in Harold's eye and conquered England. And that's when the Plantagenet dynasty started. Well, England went from being mainly Saxon now to being French Saxon. And that's where we get words like theatre as T-R-E, théâtre, and that kind of stuff. Anyway, back in those days, you had the haves and the have-nots, so the nobility and the serfs. The nobility, William was a bastard, he was an illegitimate child. The nobility didn't give a damn about anybody's mores, they had made their own. The serfs didn't. I mean, they were running around and, trying to survive, scratching off the land. They had very limited morality. The priests tried to imbue them with morality, but it didn't work that much. It's when we got the middle class that our morality started to gel. When it was serfs and nobility, the nobleman said, we've got all these little illegitimate children running around, raiding my orchards, shooting my deer, poaching my partridge and my pheasant, and I don't have enough retainers, and they're very expensive, to guard all my lands. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to decentralize power. I'm going to insist that everybody follow what the church is saying, and that is, you do not have children until you get married. Now, if everybody's just running around breeding, it's chaotic. But if you say one man, one woman, okay, after about 15 children, you get a little blasé. With the infant mortality rate of about 2/3, maybe 5 of the children survive. And you say, now, if your children shoot my deer, I will put your eyes out. That's called decentralization of power. Now, he has to say to his children, if you go into that orchard or if you go into that forest, I'm going to beat you with this axe handle. Because he knows that he'll be responsible for it. That's decentralization of power. Now the Lord didn't have to hire more retainers to look after his stuff, because now all these guys, now they have to get married and they have to look after what their children do. And there are less children coming because it's, I've hit that before. It's all right. Okay, one more time. But after 15 children, you're pretty blasé, okay? Now, when it's a different, there's an expression, there's no aphrodisiac like a new woman, and I suppose the same in the other direction, there's no aphrodisiac like a new man. But if you're not restricted to one, there's a lot more stooping and the result thereof going on. Okay, so now that reinforced with metaphysics. For example, using religion to reinforce a smart thing. The Jews, for example, and the Arabs lived in the desert, okay? You didn't have a lot of water, you drank it. You didn't wash your penis in it, so it's good to cut the foreskin off because then you don't get the smegma buildup and you don't get infections. Well, how do we make the people do this? We say God wants them to do it. Okay, now I better do it because God's watching me. God's everywhere. See, he's the ultimate policeman, and you want to do what's right in God's sight. So they would do that. But what they were doing is saying, this is a pragmatic thing. The elders were very intelligent, and they knew that the people were too involved herding the sheep and doing whatever else, and they couldn't think of these things, so they thought of it for them. I think my ears are growing, Jim, because this thing's getting tighter. Anyway, so now we move up, and we're moving away from the just haves and have-nots. I'm going very quickly. Obviously, this is a lot of history in there, and there are a lot of different things involved in this. But we get to, let's say, Victorian times in England, okay, with the 1800s when the steam power was discovered, and all of a sudden, we can make machines that can be run by steam, because there's a limit to what manpower will do. So they got steam power, and they got these machines in, and all of a sudden you had cotton gins and printing presses and stuff that could be run by these machines, and that provided a lot of employment. And you had people who were just peasants in England and Ireland and going off to be nabobs. What's a nabob? A nabob is a person who goes to, say, India, exploits the people and the resources, and comes back very rich. So these guys would go off and they'd come back, even America and Canada and places like that, they'd go off and trap furs and come back very rich. And now they had estate. They had estate to leave to somebody. And they wanted it to be their child. So now that reinforced the, you don't sleep with anyone but me, because I want to be sure that I leave my estate to my child, not that good-looking guy's child over there. Okay? I'm not doing all this work to leave my estate to that guy's child. Okay. So that's what they would do. They would now reinforce the childbearer must stay a virgin until she's married and must stay faithful in the marriage. Okay. Before that, there was none of this problem because the people that lived in the cities were very few. The rural people were the majority, and how they lived was the minute they turned 13, 14, when the hormones are eating the genitals off them, their parents would get together and they'd say, the two fathers, now look, you've got a young daughter there and she's come of age, and I've got a son here, and I tell you what, I'll give them 40 acres if you'll throw in 10 head of cattle. And then the other father said, look, I tell you what, I'll throw in 12 head of cattle, but you got to give them 60 acres. All right, I'll give them 60 acres, but you got to throw in a bag of feed too. All right, I'll throw in a bag of feed. This is how you got married. And the kids sat there. Okay. Now, that worked. You know why? The expectations were different. She knew what she had to do in the marriage. She cooked, she cleaned, she had the children, fed the children, made the food so that he could go. He went out, he worked, blah, blah. There was none of the stuff we have today, where you silly women want to work. And, where we cross over in our careers and things, and there is some competition in that. If she said, I want to go out and work in the fields, everybody would look at her like she was insane. Now, you would argue correctly that she should have the right to do that. She didn't want the right. She said, you go out and get dirty. God, I'll stay in here and make the food and eat a little myself. And, I'll be... So that's how it was, separation of duties. And that's a very effective way of doing things in business as well. So that's what happened. So when they hit about 13, 14, they were married, by agreement with their parents. My father's father was taken, my grandfather John Ward, and he was taken at night to this man's house. And this man had 3 daughters. And this is in Ireland. My father was from Ireland, my mother from Italy. And this man had 3 daughters, and my grandfather's father had brought him over to see which one he wanted. They were sleeping. He threw back the blanket. They were naked under the blanket. And he said, "Which one do you want?" He said, "I'll take the one with the spotty bum." I mean, that was she had freckles on her nose, and this made her different from the other 2. That was how he. It's just amazing. And I'm not that old. I mean, so anyway. A lot of things happened like that in Ireland. Even dentistry was whiskey and a pliers. So here comes the Industrial Revolution. Now you got people moving from the rural areas into the cities because they're getting jobs. And for all you libertarians, since there were no rules about it, people were being worked 18-hour days, no weekends. Children were being worked in the factories. So the lack of rules really worked well for the capitalists, who would put in capital, say, "I'll buy this machine to do this thing, but now if you want a job, you'll work 18 hours and you'll take what I give you." And of course it was more than they were making in the country, because they were making pretty much nothing. And they'd barter and trade their eggs for the tomatoes and stuff, maybe make a few pennies and then go to town and buy a keg of beer and then bring it home, and that was a great big party for a month, you know. But here they'd make maybe tuppence. Whoa! But they'd have to work 18-hour days and that sort of thing. So they really had very, very rough lives before the government stepped in and said, "This is not going to work." And then Karl Marx, who was living there, Karl Marx was a German Jew living in England. And he saw the abuses that were being heaped on these people. I mean, child labor was very common. And these poor people were forced to work just to survive, and then they'd have to pay to live someplace. It was just awful. And that's why he wrote the Communist Manifesto. And that's why it wouldn't work in a place where you don't have that kind of depravity. But it worked then, or it worked for them, and it at least got them some representation in government. So anyway, that's how our sexual mores really gelled in the Industrial Revolution, actually all over the world. I'm talking about England because I happen to study that fairly deeply. So you've got things that happened that now don't happen. So why do we stick to it? For example, pregnancy was quite common. I remember as a young boy being told, "Don't, be careful, she'll get pregnant." Back in those days, we had what were called French letters or condoms. Crepe de Chine was one. I knew because my cousin Errol, who was quite a lover, would have them always at his bedside. But even though we have a way of preventing pregnancy and preventing disease and that kind of stuff, we still stick to these morals. What happened when after America was discovered, when the Mayflower arrived? Those people were Puritans. And you have still the puritanical attitude towards sex in America that those people brought over. And it's fairly destructive. I'll give you an example, a kind of a funny example. Just recently, a man discovered this nude woman swimming in his swimming pool in Tennessee, in the Camelot subdivision, and he was out there just watching this amazing thing while her accomplice took his house apart and took everything, all his personal. And when she got out of the pool, he handed her a towel and asked if she'd like to come to church with him. And they got clean away. Now, that could not have happened if we weren't so fascinated with nudity. And how do you not become fascinated? Anybody here been to a nudist resort? They used to call them nudist colonies. You have, yes. I'll bet you anything that you people know what I'm going to talk about. If you go to a nudist resort, you will spend the first half hour kind of... But after 13 minutes, you'll find you're not looking at genitalia anymore, you're looking in the face. Why? Because this is where the expression is. When I say to Margaret, God, you look lovely today, she gets a big smile. Not on her boobs, on her face. So I know I've made a hit, right? Even the kids who are crotch height are going, can I have 25 cents to play the video game? They couldn't care less. If you're in and it's a big equalizer too. I did a TV show about this, that's why I know this. I took a crew up there. My crew, the prejudices. I'm not touching anybody's hand. Ah, you're thinking nudist colony, leper colony. No, don't worry. These are just ordinary people. All of you, I'm visualizing you naked. Ah! No, I'm joking. All of you guys could be there. You're just normal people. They're from lawyers, plumbers, whatever you and it's an equalizer. Nobody knows who you are, except for if you have a tattoo saying I'm a very proud plumber, then they know that's what you are. But it's a big equalizer, and everybody speaks to each other equally, and everybody looks at the face because that's where the expression is. And then nudity is not a big deal. Now, you think if that guy who has been to a nudist resort, and if he was in his Tennessee home, and this nude woman got into his pool, he'd say, hey, get the heck out of my pool, right? Not, no, you see, he'd have a much different reaction because nudity is not a big deal to him. And if it wasn't to all of us, like with the Romans and the Roman baths, that kind of thing wouldn't happen. There wouldn't be destructive things. Great, okay, so I've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my country, Swaziland, and the sexual mores there.
Your sexuality.
No, not my sexuality. I don't have any. I had it surgically removed. Okay. Here's what happens in Swaziland. If I decide I want to marry this lovely girl right here, I have to pay her father here 12 head of cattle. Why? That's called lobola. If I don't pay him, any children that I have, if they're female, the cattle go to him when they get married. So what I do, I try her out sexually. Aha, she can conceive. Excellent, that's a good sign, she's pregnant. Now, if she has a female child, she's even more valuable. That kind of flies in the face of chauvinism in Africa. But it's purely economically based. I know that my daughters will bring cattle to me. Now, if she's a princess, she gets 15. Three more for a princess. That's quite an equalizer. But the point is, I have to try her out first, and I have to make sure. And that's acceptable in Swaziland. And sex is like, I'm hungry, I think I'll go over there and eat a steak. Oh, I'm horny, I think I'll go over there and have some sex. I mean, it's more on that basis. Now, in Lesotho, which is about 300 miles as the crow flies, and it used to be Basotho land, it's now Lesotho, it's up in the mountains, they have a completely different attitude. In Swaziland, you make love, once you're married, you stay with your husband. In Lesotho, you must stay a virgin until you're married. But then you can ship anybody you like. That's their culture. So when there was a prime minister of Lesotho came over with his wife to a dance, and there was a diplomatic ball given by Simon Gumalo. She was there just kind of clapping, and Simon asked her, he's a very good-looking man, said, would you care to dance? And, oh yes, thank you. And he was dancing, and she's grinding all over his thigh, and he's going, oh my God, there's going to be an international incident. And he's looking, and there's the prime minister just clapping. This is normal behavior for him. She's his woman, but she now can have him as a lover if she wants, or if he wants. So all these different, you can't become insular and say, my sexual morality is the only one, so there. You've got to open your mind. There's a big world out there, and everybody has a different idea. But that, essentially, in a very tiny nutshell, is the genesis of how we think and why we think that way. I think Margaret is putting her hat of get off the stage on. And so, thank you very much for your attention.
Wonderful talk. And now I'm sure we'll have lots of questions.
Oh. Yeah, I can't turn this off. So all right, yes.
Wait for the mic.
Yeah, wait
Yes,
for the mic
please.
so other people can hear you.
Well, of course, I know John, and John has a fabulous sense of humor. I, too, could paint freckles on my bottom.
You would have been attractive to my great-grandfather.
I would like that. I have both a serious and a funny thing. The serious is, I, as a woman, really resent that all of the saints that are females are all virgins. How many women resent that?
Okay, let me just answer that.
No, wait a minute, wait a
Let me answer
minute.
that. You can go to your second question in a minute. Saint Teresa, by the way, Bernini carved a statue of her, and she gives this description of an angel that visited her. Just listen to this. You won't believe it. Okay, Saint Teresa was a nun, and she described her ecstasy. It's called the ecstasy of Saint Teresa. And she said, "Beside me on the left appeared an angel in bodily form. He was not tall, but short." He was kind of a dwarf, and very beautiful. And his face was so aflame that he appeared to be one of the highest rank of angels. So there's rankings apparently in heaven, who seemed to be all on fire. In his hands I saw a great golden spear, and at the iron tip there appeared to be a point of fire. This he plunged into my heart several times, so that it had penetrated into my entrails. When he pulled it out, I felt that he took them with it and left me utterly consumed by the great love of God. The pain was so severe that it made me utter several moans. The sweetness caused by this intense pain is so extreme that one cannot possibly wish it to cease, nor is one's soul content with anything but God. This is not a physical but a spiritual pain, though the body has some share in it, even a considerable share. And what this guy did was, he did a statue of a woman, and the Pope saw this and said, "This is a woman having an orgasm," and he got into trouble. And he had to explain, no, this is a religious ecstasy. And they left the statue alone. They were going to smash it. My question to the Pope would have been, how do you know what the face of a woman having an orgasm looks like?
My next comment is very serious,
Yeah.
really serious.
Okay.
And I would hope there would be many people in the group that would agree. You spoke briefly about the hormones that begin.
Yes.
Now, of course, as a woman, we can get pregnant, so we're very different. But I have a 13-year-old grandson. So now, what are those boys who say live in the United States and have the mores of the United States? What are those boys that are 13 years old supposed to do with those hormones?
Okay, there's a thing called onanism. We spoke about it. I don't know why that poor guy got this named after him. But what I did, I went to an all-boys boarding school, was I introduced my member to my hand. And they became fast friends for many years. Many years. Any other questions? And the Sears robot catalog. Great. Then I was very comprehensive in my talk. No more questions. Thank you very much.
You're done. And thank you very much. We enjoyed it, every one of us. Next week's speaker is Patricia Guy. Her talk is Uncovering Joy. She's going to discuss one pathway to experiencing more joy, peace, and the clear awareness that is our true nature. Patricia Guy is the author of A Connoisseur's Field Guide to Happiness and Love Notes from Self to Self. Well, interesting background, training in Cherokee, Tibetan, and Buddhist sacred traditions. And we'll see her next week, and we hope to see you next week also. So we're done for today. Dispose properly of your coffee cups, turn your cell phones back on, and stack your chairs, please. Thank you.